The entire town laughed when 15 broken cars appeared in front of a struggling single-father's garage before sunrise. By sunset, nobody was laughing harder than the woman who sent them. And nobody understood that those rusted machines were about to change everything. The town of Willow Creek sat quietly between rolling farmland and two-lane highways, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's business before breakfast. News traveled faster than traffic. Rumors lasted longer than facts. And on that particular Monday morning, the biggest story in town sat directly in front of Carter Auto Repair. Mason Carter stepped out of his small farmhouse carrying a coffee mug and a list of repair appointments for the day. At 41 years old, he had learned to expect problems. Life had given him plenty of practice. Raising his 11-year-old daughter Emma alone, while keeping a struggling garage alive required patience, sacrifice, and more determination than most people realized. But even Mason stopped walking when he saw the line of tow trucks parked outside his property. One after another, battered vehicles covered the gravel lot. 15 of them. Some missing doors. Some barely rolling. Others looked as though they had not moved in years. Mason stared for several seconds. The morning breeze moved gently through the oak trees surrounding the property. Somewhere nearby, birds continued singing as if nothing unusual had happened. "Dad!" Emma's voice came from behind him. She stepped onto the porch carrying her backpack. "What happened?" Mason slowly counted the vehicles again. 15. Exactly 15. "That," he said quietly, "is a very good question." Emma walked beside him and looked across the lot. Her eyes widened. "Those are all ours now." Before Mason could answer, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. A black luxury SUV rolled to a stop near the garage entrance. The driver stepped out first, followed by a woman dressed in an expensive cream-colored business suit. Savannah Reed, owner of Reed Automotive, the largest dealership group within 50 miles. Wealthy, influential, successful, and not known for her kindness. Savannah removed her sunglasses and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone enjoying a private joke. Several people had already gathered near the roadside. Curious neighbors watched from parked trucks. Phones appeared. Cameras started recording. Small-town entertainment had arrived. Savannah approached the first row of damaged vehicles. "Good morning, Mason." Her voice carried easily across the lot. Mason remained calm. "Morning, Savannah." She gestured toward the collection of broken cars. "I heard business has been slow." A few people laughed. Savannah continued. "So I figured I would help." More laughter followed. Emma lowered her eyes. Even at 11 years old, she understood exactly what was happening. This was not help. This was humiliation dressed up as generosity. Savannah walked slowly between the vehicles. These were headed for scrap auctions. Most of them are worthless. She turned toward the crowd. "But maybe Willow Creek's favorite mechanic can perform a miracle." The laughter grew louder. Mason said nothing. The sunlight reflected across windshields covered in dust and years of neglect. Around him stood people waiting for a reaction, waiting for anger, waiting for embarrassment, waiting for failure. Savannah folded her arms. "Well," she asked, "what do you think?" Mason looked at the vehicles, then at Emma, then back toward Savannah. His expression never changed. That seemed to disappoint her slightly. "I think," he said quietly, "every car has a story." A few people exchanged confused glances. Savannah laughed. "Those stories end in junkyards." More laughter spread through the crowd. Emma's cheeks turned red. Mason could see the hurt in her eyes. That bothered him far more than any insult directed at him. Savannah glanced at her watch. "Anyway, enjoy your new inventory." She turned and walked back toward the SUV. The crowd slowly followed her lead, still smiling, still talking, still convinced they had witnessed the joke of the year. Within minutes, only Mason and Emma remained standing beside the 15 abandoned vehicles. The lot grew quiet again. The distant sound of traffic faded into the background. Emma stared at the ground. "Why do people have to be like that?" Mason placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. For a moment, he did not answer. Instead, he looked across the rows of damaged vehicles scattered beneath the morning sun. Rust, dust, broken glass, faded paint. Most people saw garbage. Most people saw failure. Most people saw exactly what Savannah wanted them to see. Then Mason walked toward the first car and slowly ran his hand across the weathered fender. His eyes narrowed slightly. Something had caught his attention. Not in the first car. Not in the second, but somewhere farther down the line, hidden among the 15 forgotten machines. A detail so small nobody else would have noticed it. Mason smiled faintly. Let's see what stories they want to tell. The town expected Mason Carter to spend the next few days complaining. They expected frustration. They expected excuses. Most of all, they expected failure. What they did not expect was silence. The next morning, before the sun fully climbed above the horizon, Mason was already walking between the rows of abandoned vehicles with a flashlight in one hand and a notepad in the other. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he moved from car to car. Some had obvious problems. Others looked beyond saving. Yet Mason never judged a vehicle by its first impression. Machines had taught him that appearances often lied. Emma sat on an overturned toolbox near the garage entrance watching him work. The cool morning air carried the scent of motor oil, cut grass, and fresh coffee drifting from the farmhouse kitchen. Have you found anything? She asked. Mason glanced toward the seventh vehicle in line, an aging dark blue coupe hidden between two rust-covered sedans. Maybe. Emma immediately stood. What is it? Mason smiled faintly. I am not sure yet. That answer only made her more curious. Throughout the day, customers arrived for routine repairs. Every one of them slowed down when they saw the collection of broken vehicles. Some laughed openly. Others tried to hide it. A few offered sympathy that sounded suspiciously like pity. Mason accepted every reaction with the same calm expression. By lunchtime, photographs of the 15 vehicles had spread across local social media pages. The captions grew more creative with each repost. Some called it the largest junkyard in county history. Others joked that Savannah Reed had donated a retirement home for broken engines. The comments multiplied by the hour. Across town, Savannah sat inside her modern office overlooking Reed Automotive's largest dealership. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon sunlight across polished desks and expensive furniture. Several managers sat around a conference table discussing quarterly sales numbers. Yet Savannah's attention drifted repeatedly toward her phone. Another photo of Mason's garage appeared. Another joke. Another comment. Another wave of laughter. She smiled. The story had become exactly what she intended. Public entertainment. A reminder that ambition alone could not overcome reality. At least, that was what she believed. Back at the garage, Mason finally reached the seventh vehicle again after closing time. The sun dipped lower in the sky. Long shadows stretched across the lot. Emma remained nearby, finishing homework while sitting on a folding chair beside the workbench. The garage lights flickered on as evening settled over Willow Creek. Mason opened the hood of the blue coupe and studied the engine compartment carefully. At first glance, it appeared ordinary, neglected, unremarkable, but something about it continued bothering him. Not in a bad way. In the way a puzzle bothers someone who knows a piece is missing. He reached beneath a layer of dust and wiped a small section clean with a rag. His eyes narrowed. Then he moved closer. A tiny metal plate sat partially hidden near the firewall. Most people would never have noticed it. Most mechanics would have overlooked it. But Mason had spent nearly 20 years rebuilding vehicles others considered worthless. Details mattered. He brushed away more dirt. The plate revealed a sequence of numbers. Then a symbol. Then another marking almost completely concealed beneath years of grime. Emma noticed the change in her father's expression immediately. Dad. Mason did not answer right away. He kept studying the plate. The fading sunlight reflected across the metal. His heartbeat quickened slightly. Not because he had found something valuable. Because he had found something unexpected. There was a difference. He grabbed a reference guide from the workbench and compared the markings. Several minutes passed. The garage grew quiet. Even the evening crickets seemed distant. Finally, Emma walked closer. You found something, didn't you? Mason looked up slowly. Maybe. She crossed her arms. That is the same thing you said this morning. Mason laughed softly. And it is still true. He turned back toward the engine compartment. The markings suggested this vehicle was not what everyone believed it was. Not even close. Yet he needed more information before reaching conclusions. Excitement was dangerous. Assumptions were worse. Outside, headlights appeared briefly along the highway as evening traffic moved through town. Inside the garage, Mason continued examining the blue coupe while questions multiplied in his mind. Why had this car ended up among the others? Why was it mixed into a collection supposedly headed for scrap? And most importantly, how had nobody noticed what was sitting right in front of them? Meanwhile, across Willow Creek, People continued laughing online. They shared photographs. They made jokes. They predicted failure. They saw 15 broken vehicles. Mason saw something entirely different. And somewhere inside the seventh car, hidden beneath layers of dust and years of neglect, the first crack had appeared in the story everyone thought they already understood. By the end of the week, the entire town had given Mason Carter a new nickname: the Junkyard Dad. People used it in grocery stores, at gas stations, and in the comment sections beneath every photograph shared online. Some meant it as a joke. Others meant it as an insult. A few even thought it was harmless fun. But every time Emma heard it, she felt a small knot tighten in her chest. She never told her father how much it bothered her. She already knew what he would say. Character mattered more than opinions. Grace mattered more than applause. Still, she was 11 years old, and some lessons were harder to carry than others. One Friday afternoon, Emma climbed into Mason's pickup after school and immediately noticed something different. Her father was smiling. Not a big smile. Not the kind that demanded attention. The quiet kind. The kind that appeared when he solved a difficult problem. "What happened?" she asked. Mason started the engine. "Why do you think something happened?" Emma crossed her arms. "Because you only make that face when you know something nobody else knows." Mason laughed softly. "You know me too well." The truck rolled down the highway toward the garage while golden sunlight stretched across open farmland. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Emma finally asked the question she had been carrying all day. "Is it the seventh car?" Mason glanced at her. "Maybe." "Dad." "What?" "That answer is getting old." His laughter filled the cab. It was the first time Emma had heard him laugh like that in days. Back at the garage, the atmosphere felt different now. The 15 abandoned vehicles still occupied most of the lot, but Mason had begun organizing them carefully. Parts were cataloged. Records were created. Every vehicle was documented. To most people, it looked like a mountain of problems. To Mason, it looked like a collection of possibilities. He walked directly toward the blue coupe the moment they arrived. Emma followed close behind. The evening sun reflected off the dusty windshield while shadows stretched across the gravel. Mason opened the hood and pointed toward the hidden identification plate he had discovered. "Look closely." Emma leaned forward. "I still do not understand what makes it special." "Neither do I completely." "Then why are you smiling?" Mason reached for a folder sitting on the workbench. Inside were reference documents he had gathered from automotive archives and collector databases. He placed several pages beside the car. Emma studied them carefully. The same sequence of numbers appeared on each page. The same unusual symbol. Slowly her eyes widened. "Wait." Mason nodded. "Exactly. This car is not what everyone thinks it is." "No." He closed the folder. "It is not." The discovery was exciting, but Mason remained cautious. Years of experience had taught him that assumptions could be expensive. He needed proof. Real proof. Yet even without answers, one thing was becoming clear. Somebody had made a mistake when these vehicles were selected for disposal. A very big mistake. Across town, Savannah Reed remained completely unaware. She spent most of her days moving between dealership locations, investor meetings, and business events. Success followed her everywhere. Newspaper articles praised her leadership. Industry magazines featured her accomplishments. People admired her confidence. Few people noticed how carefully she protected her reputation. That Friday evening, Savannah attended a networking reception hosted at the Willow Creek Country Club. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished wood floors while business leaders exchanged conversations over dinner. Near the back of the room, two local entrepreneurs discussed Mason's garage. Savannah overheard part of the conversation. Apparently one of those cars might be something special. The other man laughed. "Not a chance." Savannah smiled and continued walking. Yet the comment lingered in her mind longer than expected. Meanwhile, at the garage, Mason spent another late evening studying the blue coupe. The old radio played softly in the background. Crickets chirped outside. Emma had fallen asleep on a couch in the office after finishing homework. The world felt peaceful, almost suspended in time. Mason carefully removed a panel near the trunk compartment. Dust drifted into the air. He expected rust. Maybe old paperwork. Perhaps nothing at all. Instead, his flashlight reflected off something unusual tucked deep inside a hidden cavity. He frowned, reached farther inside, then slowly pulled out a small leather pouch covered in decades of dust. The garage suddenly felt much quieter. Mason turned the pouch over in his hands. It was old, very old, yet remarkably preserved. For a moment, he simply stared at it. Questions flooded his mind. Who put it there? When? And why had nobody found it before? Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees surrounding the property. Inside, the garage lights cast long shadows across the floor. Mason carefully loosened the drawstring. The contents shifted softly inside. Whatever had been hidden there had remained untouched for years, perhaps decades. He looked toward the sleeping Emma, then back at the pouch. His heartbeat quickened slightly, not from excitement, from instinct. The same instinct that had guided him through thousands of repairs and countless difficult decisions. Somewhere inside that forgotten leather pouch waited another piece of a story nobody in Willow Creek had seen coming. For several seconds, Mason simply stared at the leather pouch resting in his hands. The garage felt unusually still. Even the old radio seemed quieter now, its music fading into the background as if the room itself was waiting. He glanced toward the office where Emma slept peacefully beneath a blanket. Then he looked back at the pouch. Time had darkened the leather. Dust filled the creases. Yet despite its age, the drawstring remained intact. Someone had hidden it carefully. Someone had wanted it to stay hidden. Mason loosened the string and gently poured the contents onto a clean shop towel spread across the workbench. A few objects slid into view. Several old documents folded neatly together. A small metal medallion. And a photograph. Mason picked up the photograph first. The image had faded over time, but the details remained surprisingly clear. A group of people stood beside several restored vehicles in front of a building he did not recognize. Most were smiling proudly toward the camera. One man stood near the center. Something about him seemed familiar. Not because Mason knew him, because he had seen the same face somewhere recently. He studied the photograph again, then walked toward the office and retrieved the folder containing records he had collected from the blue coupe. Moments later, he found it. The same man appeared in one of the archive photographs connected to a regional collector association that no longer existed. Mason leaned back slowly. Questions multiplied. The pouch was no accident. The car was no accident. Somehow the pieces connected. He just could not see how yet. The following morning arrived cool and clear. Sunlight spilled across the garage lot while Emma helped organize tools before school. Mason showed her the photograph. Her eyes widened immediately. That is from the pouch? He nodded. What do you think it means? Emma studied the faces. I think somebody cared enough to hide it. Mason smiled. That is exactly what I think. Before she left for school, Emma paused beside the blue coupe. Everyone keeps calling these junk cars. She looked at her father. But I do not think they are anymore. Mason watched the morning light reflect across the vehicle's dusty body panels. Sometimes people decide what something is worth before they understand it. Emma nodded thoughtfully. It was one of those lessons she seemed to collect from him without realizing it. Across town, the jokes continued. Social media posts multiplied daily. Videos of the 15 vehicles attracted thousands of views. People debated how long it would take Mason to give up. Some predicted bankruptcy. Others predicted failure. A few defended him. Most simply watched for entertainment. Savannah Reed noticed all of it. At first, she enjoyed the attention. It reinforced the image she wanted people to see. Successful businesswoman. Market leader. The person who always won. Yet something unexpected began happening. Not everyone was laughing anymore. More and more comments praised Mason's work ethic. More people admired how he refused to respond with anger. Instead of becoming a joke, he was quietly becoming a story. One afternoon, Savannah sat in her office reviewing sales reports when her operations manager entered carrying a tablet. You should probably see this. Savannah looked up. The screen displayed photographs from Mason's garage. Several local automotive enthusiasts had visited the property. Their posts described his expertise, professionalism, and dedication. One comment received particular attention. If Mason Carter says a car deserves another chance, I would trust his opinion before anybody else's. Savannah frowned. People actually believe that. The manager shrugged. More than you might think. After he left, Savannah stared at the screen longer than necessary. For the first time, a small feeling she rarely experienced entered her thoughts. Uncertainty. Meanwhile, Mason's days became longer. Customers continued arriving. Repairs still needed completing. Bills still needed paying. Yet every spare hour disappeared into the 15 vehicles. Especially the blue coupe. The deeper he investigated, the more unusual it seemed. Several original components suggested a history very different from what public records showed. Certain modifications made no sense. Ownership documents contained gaps, missing years, missing details, missing explanations. Late one evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Mason sat alone at the workbench reviewing the documents from the pouch. Outside, rain tapped softly against the garage roof. The smell of motor oil mixed with damp earth drifting through a partially open window. He unfolded one of the older papers and studied it carefully beneath the lamp. At first glance it appeared ordinary, just another document. Then he noticed a handwritten notation near the bottom corner. Small, faded, easy to miss. His eyes narrowed. He read it once, then again. The note referenced a location less than 20 miles from Willow Creek, a place that still existed. Mason sat perfectly still. For weeks he had been collecting fragments of a puzzle. For the first time, he had found something that pointed somewhere real, somewhere he could actually visit. He looked toward the rain-covered darkness beyond the garage door. Somewhere out there waited another piece of the story. And for reasons he could not fully explain, he had the feeling that whatever he found next would change everything he thought he knew about the seventh car. The next morning arrived wrapped in a blanket of low clouds and soft gray light. Mason Carter was already awake before dawn. The document with the handwritten location sat folded carefully inside his jacket pocket while he prepared breakfast for Emma. Neither of them spoke much at first. Both were thinking about the same thing. The mystery had finally pointed somewhere tangible, somewhere beyond dusty records and hidden compartments, somewhere real. Emma pushed her cereal bowl aside and looked across the kitchen table. "You are going today, aren't you?" Mason smiled. "You know me too well. Can I come?" He hesitated. School mattered. Responsibilities mattered. Yet so did moments that shaped a person's life. After a few seconds, he nodded. "Only if we stop for homework afterward." Emma's grin answered before words ever could. An hour later, the pickup truck rolled down a narrow county road lined with old maple trees and weathered fences. The location from the document led them toward a forgotten section of the county where fewer people traveled each year. Fields stretched endlessly beneath the cloudy sky. Small farmhouses appeared and disappeared between hills. The farther they drove, the quieter the world became. Eventually, they reached their destination. A faded sign stood near a gravel entrance almost hidden by overgrown vegetation. The lettering had nearly vanished with age. Behind it sat a large property surrounded by rusted fencing and mature oak trees. Emma looked through the windshield. "What is this place?" Mason stared ahead. "I think we are about to find out." The property appeared abandoned at first glance. Several old buildings stood scattered across the land. A workshop, a storage barn, a small office structure. Time had left its mark on everything. Yet despite the decay, something felt preserved rather than forgotten. As they stepped from the truck, the air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth and old wood. Silence surrounded them. Then a voice interrupted the stillness. Most people stopped visiting years ago. Mason turned. An elderly man stood near the barn entrance holding a walking cane. His white hair moved gently in the breeze. His expression seemed more curious than surprised. "Can I help you?" Mason removed the folded document from his pocket. "I found this." The man's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the paper. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Mason to notice. "Where did you get that?" For the next 20 minutes, they sat together inside the old office building while rain tapped softly against the roof. The man introduced himself as Walter Jennings. Decades earlier, he had been involved with a private network of collectors and restoration experts scattered throughout the region. Most had retired. Some had passed away. Their stories faded alongside them. Mason showed him the photograph from the leather pouch. Walter stared at it for a long time, longer than expected. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I knew some of these people." Emma leaned forward immediately. "Really?" Walter smiled. "A long time ago." As the conversation continued, pieces of the puzzle shifted into place. Not enough to reveal the entire picture, but enough to make one thing clear. The blue coupe had once belonged to someone respected within a small circle of collectors who valued history more than profit. People who believed certain vehicles carried stories worth preserving. Mason listened carefully. Every answer seemed to generate 3 new questions. Then Walter asked something unexpected. "Do you still have the car?" Mason nodded. "Good." Walter's expression grew serious. "Take care of it." "Why?" Walter looked toward the rain-covered window. Because some people spend their lives protecting things they believe matter. He paused. And sometimes they leave those responsibilities behind for someone else. The words lingered in the room long after he finished speaking. Back in Willow Creek, life continued moving forward. Customers arrived at Reed Automotive. Sales meetings filled Savannah Reed's schedule. Yet troubling signs had begun appearing. A few longtime customers quietly transferred restoration projects elsewhere. Online conversations increasingly praised Mason's craftsmanship. What began as a joke was slowly transforming into admiration. Savannah noticed. She simply refused to admit how much it bothered her. That evening, Mason returned home carrying more information than answers. The rain had stopped. The setting sun painted the clouds gold and orange above the garage. Emma disappeared inside to finish homework, while Mason walked directly toward the blue coupe. He stood beside it for several minutes without touching anything. Walter's words echoed in his mind. Some people spend their lives protecting things they believe matter. Slowly, Mason opened the driver's door and settled into the seat. The familiar scent of old leather and aging materials filled the cabin. For a moment, everything felt still. Then his eyes landed on something he had never noticed before. A tiny marking etched beneath the dashboard. Small enough to escape attention. Hidden enough to remain unnoticed for years. Mason leaned closer. His pulse quickened, because the symbol matched one from the documents in the leather pouch exactly. And for the first time since this journey began, he realized the seventh car might not be the only vehicle among the 15 hiding a secret. The discovery changed everything and nothing at the same time. Mason still had bills to pay. Customers still needed repairs. The 15 abandoned vehicles still occupied most of his property. Yet from that moment forward, he no longer saw them as random machines left behind as part of a cruel joke. He saw a pattern, a connection, a possibility that someone, somewhere, had overlooked something far more important than scrap metal. The following week became the busiest of his life. Every morning started before sunrise. Every night ended long after Emma had gone to sleep. The garage lights became a familiar landmark for drivers passing along the highway after dark. Some people shook their heads. Others admired his dedication. Either way, Mason kept working. The symbol hidden beneath the dashboard of the blue coupe became his new focus. Using old records, collector forums, and historical archives, he slowly pieced together fragments of information. The symbol belonged to a small private network of restoration enthusiasts that operated decades earlier. Membership had been limited. Records were scarce. Yet one detail stood out immediately. Several vehicles connected to that network had become highly respected among collectors, not because of their price, but because of the stories attached to them. One evening, Emma sat at the workbench helping organize documents while Mason reviewed photographs. The garage smelled of fresh paint, machine oil, and sawdust. Outside, summer crickets filled the air with their nightly chorus. What if the symbol is on more than one car? Emma asked suddenly. Mason looked up. I was thinking the same thing. Together, they spent the next 2 hours inspecting the remaining vehicles. One by one, flashlight beams moved across dashboards, door panels, engine compartments, and trunk spaces. Most revealed nothing. Then, near midnight, Emma gasped. Dad. Mason walked over immediately. Hidden beneath the glove compartment of another vehicle sat the same symbol. Smaller than a coin. Almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. For several seconds, neither spoke. They simply stared. Then Emma smiled. So you were right. Mason laughed softly. Maybe we both were. The discovery confirmed what he already suspected. The 15 vehicles were connected somehow. Not all of them, but enough to matter. The joke that Savannah Reed had delivered to his property was beginning to look less like random misfortune and more like an extraordinary mistake. Across town, Savannah faced problems of her own. At first they seemed minor. A delayed shipment. A canceled purchase agreement. An unexpected expense. Normal business challenges. Then larger issues followed. Inventory costs increased. Financing conditions tightened. Several high-value customers postponed purchases. None of it created a crisis by itself. Together, however, they formed a troubling pattern. During a weekly executive meeting, Savannah reviewed the latest numbers with increasing frustration. Explain this. She slid a report across the conference table. Her finance director studied it carefully. The restoration market is shifting. Savannah frowned. What does that have to do with us? The answer arrived quickly. More collectors were seeking specialized restoration expertise instead of purchasing newer inventory. Local attention around unique automotive stories had increased. Enthusiasts were talking, comparing notes, sharing photographs. Once again, Mason's garage appeared in the conversation. Savannah leaned back silently. The connection irritated her more than she cared to admit. Meanwhile, word about Mason's work spread farther beyond Willow Creek. One Saturday afternoon, a visitor arrived unexpectedly. The man drove a vintage pickup truck and introduced himself as Richard Holloway. His name meant little to most people. Within automotive circles, however, it carried weight. He was known as a respected collector with decades of experience evaluating rare vehicles. Richard walked slowly around the blue coupe before examining several of the other cars. He asked careful questions, took notes, observed details few others noticed. Nearly an hour passed before he finally approached Mason. "You have something unusual here." Mason smiled. "That seems to be happening a lot lately." Richard nodded. "Most people see old metal." His gaze moved across the row of vehicles. "I see history." Emma listened from nearby, trying not to look too excited. Richard crouched beside one of the cars displaying the hidden symbol. His expression grew thoughtful, then serious. Finally, he stood and faced Mason. "Do not rush into selling anything." Mason had not planned to. Still, the warning caught his attention. "Why?" Richard looked across the property. The setting sun painted the vehicles in shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretched across the gravel. For a moment, the scene looked less like a junkyard and more like a forgotten museum waiting to be rediscovered. Richard folded his arms. "Because I think you are only seeing the beginning of what these cars really represent." The words lingered long after he left. Later that night, Mason stood alone in the garage reviewing everything he had learned. Documents covered the workbench. Photographs lined the wall. Symbols connected one vehicle to another. Questions outnumbered answers. Yet one truth had become impossible to ignore. The joke that once made an entire town laugh was slowly transforming into something nobody expected. And somewhere among the 15 forgotten vehicles, a larger story was still waiting to reveal itself. The weeks that followed transformed Mason's property into something nobody in Willow Creek could have predicted. The rows of abandoned vehicles still stood beneath the open sky, but they no longer looked forgotten. Fresh tarps covered exposed sections. Parts were organized carefully. Restoration work had begun on several of the most promising cars. The gravel lot that once inspired laughter now attracted visitors. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they had heard rumors. A few arrived because they recognized something most people missed. Value often hides beneath neglect. One crisp Saturday morning, a line of pickup trucks appeared outside the garage before Mason even opened the doors. Collectors, enthusiasts, hobbyists. They walked among the vehicles asking questions, taking photographs, and studying details. The atmosphere felt completely different from the day Savannah Reed had delivered the cars. Back then people arrived to laugh. Now they arrived to learn. Emma noticed the change before anyone else. As she carried a box of supplies toward the workshop, she stopped beside her father. "Nobody is calling you Junkyard Dad anymore." Mason glanced toward the growing crowd. "People get bored." Emma smiled. "No, they changed their minds." For a moment, Mason said nothing. Then he nodded slightly. Deep down, he knew she was right. Respect arrived quietly. It rarely announced itself. Meanwhile, across town, Savannah Reed found herself dealing with increasingly uncomfortable conversations. Her dealerships remained open. Sales continued. The business still looked successful from the outside. Yet several financial pressures had begun squeezing operations from multiple directions. Rising costs, reduced margins, delayed financing approvals. The problems were manageable individually. Together, they created strain. One afternoon, Savannah sat through a tense meeting with advisors reviewing future projections. The conference room felt colder than usual. Charts covered the screen. Numbers filled every report. When the meeting finally ended, she remained alone staring at the forecasts. Then her phone buzzed. Another article about Mason Carter appeared. This time it was not a joke. A regional automotive publication had featured his restoration work and highlighted the unusual story surrounding the 15 vehicles. The article described him as a skilled craftsman uncovering forgotten automotive history. Savannah read the headline twice. Something about it bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Back at the garage, another breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. Mason and Emma were examining documents from the leather pouch when Richard Holloway returned. The collector stepped inside carrying a large envelope. His expression seemed unusually serious. "I found something," he said. Mason immediately cleared space on the workbench. Richard removed several old photographs and historical records. One by one, he spread them across the table. Emma leaned closer. The images showed gatherings of restoration experts from decades earlier. Vehicles, workshops, collectors. Some of the same faces appeared repeatedly. Then Mason noticed something remarkable. Several of the vehicles shown in the photographs looked strikingly similar to cars sitting outside his garage. Not identical, but related, connected. Richard pointed toward one image. This group spent years preserving vehicles with historical significance. Mason studied the photograph carefully. Why? Richard smiled faintly. Because they believed stories matter. The answer sounded simple, yet it carried unexpected weight. Richard continued. Most people collect cars because of money. These people collected history. Emma listened closely. She had heard many conversations over the past few weeks, but something about this one felt important. Then Richard revealed another detail. Several members of the group had maintained private records documenting their restoration projects. Some of those records still existed. Mason's pulse quickened slightly. More records meant more answers. More answers meant a clearer picture. Yet with every discovery, the mystery seemed to grow larger rather than smaller. Later that evening, after everyone left, Mason stood alone among the vehicles. The setting sun painted the horizon in shades of gold and copper. Shadows stretched across the gravel lot. The garage lights had not been switched on yet. For a few peaceful minutes, the entire property rested between day and night. Mason slowly walked past each vehicle. The first, the second, the third. 15 machines delivered as a joke. 15 machines that had already changed his life in ways he never expected. Then he stopped beside one of the cars he had barely examined before. At first glance it appeared ordinary. Damaged. Incomplete. Nothing special. Yet after everything he had learned, he trusted his instincts more than appearances. He opened the door and sat inside. Dust floated through the fading sunlight. Silence surrounded him. Then his eyes landed on a small compartment hidden beneath the seat. He frowned, leaned closer, and carefully opened it. Inside rested a folded document sealed inside a protective sleeve. Mason stared at it without moving. Another hidden item. Another forgotten piece of the puzzle. Outside, the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the hills. Inside the car, the sealed document waited patiently in his hands. And for the first time since Savannah Reed delivered the 15 vehicles, Mason felt certain of one thing. The biggest secret among them had not been discovered yet. The document remained untouched on Mason's workbench until sunrise. Not because he lacked curiosity, because experience had taught him that important discoveries deserve patience. All night long, the sealed sleeve sat beneath the glow of a single lamp while questions filled the quiet spaces of the garage. By morning, even Emma could barely contain herself. She rushed through breakfast faster than usual and followed her father outside before the dew had disappeared from the grass. The garage door rolled open with a familiar rumble. Sunlight spilled across the concrete floor. The 15 vehicles stood exactly where they had been the night before, silent witnesses to a story that seemed to grow larger every day. Mason carefully removed the document from its protective sleeve. The paper inside was surprisingly well preserved. Folded, organized, intentional. He unfolded the first page and immediately realized it was not a personal letter. It was a collection of records. Names, dates, vehicle identification numbers, restoration notes, ownership transfers. The deeper he looked, the more his expression changed. Emma noticed immediately. What is it? Mason slowly exhaled. This is not about one car. The answer hung in the air between them. For weeks, everything had revolved around the blue coupe, the hidden symbol, the leather pouch, the forgotten photographs. Yet now the evidence suggested something much larger. Several of the 15 vehicles appeared throughout the records. Different years, different owners, different locations, yet somehow connected through the same network of collectors and preservation experts. It was as if someone had quietly spent decades protecting these vehicles before they vanished into obscurity. The realization settled heavily onto Mason's shoulders. Not because of money, Because of responsibility. Walter Jennings had warned him. Richard Holloway had hinted at it. Now the evidence set directly in front of him. These vehicles carried stories, histories, legacies, and somehow they had all ended up abandoned together. Meanwhile, across Willow Creek, another kind of pressure continued building. Reed Automotive faced increasing financial difficulties. The public did not know the details. Most employees did not either. Yet behind closed office doors, difficult conversations happened almost daily. Inventory financing costs had risen sharply. Several planned expansions were canceled. Lenders began asking harder questions. Savannah Reed still projected confidence. She still walked through showrooms with the same composed expression. Yet every evening, she remained at the office later than before. One afternoon, while reviewing reports, she noticed something that stopped her cold. Several local collectors who had once purchased specialty vehicles through her dealerships were now attending events connected to Mason's garage. She stared at the report silently. Not because she feared competition. Mason was not running a dealership. He was restoring forgotten cars. What unsettled her was something else entirely. Trust. People trusted him. More importantly, they respected him. The same man she had publicly mocked weeks earlier was becoming a symbol of everything people admired. Hard work. Integrity. Quiet perseverance. Back at the garage, the attention continued growing. Reporters began calling. Automotive bloggers requested interviews. Visitors arrived from neighboring counties. Some wanted to see the vehicles. Others wanted to hear the story. Mason politely declined most requests. He had no interest in becoming famous. Every hour spent talking was an hour not spent working. Yet despite his efforts to stay private, the spotlight continued moving closer. One evening, after a particularly long day, Emma found him sitting alone beside the blue coupe. The sun had already disappeared beyond the horizon. The garage lights cast soft reflections across freshly restored body panels. "You are worried," she said quietly. Mason smiled. "Am I that obvious?" Emma nodded. "Only to me." He looked across the lot. "I keep thinking about how all of this started." Emma followed his gaze. 15 vehicles. A joke. A public humiliation. A moment nobody would have remembered if things had gone differently. "Do you wish it never happened?" she asked. Mason thought carefully before answering. "No." The answer surprised even him. "Why not?" He looked toward the rows of vehicles, toward the friendships formed, the discoveries made, the people who had appeared at exactly the right moments. Because sometimes the things meant to embarrass us end up revealing who we really are. Emma smiled softly. It sounded exactly like something her father would say. Then the phone rang inside the office. Mason answered a few moments later. As he listened, his expression slowly shifted. Not fear, not excitement, something closer to disbelief. When the call ended, he stood quietly for several seconds. Emma waited. Who was it? Mason looked toward the collection of vehicles one more time, then back toward his daughter. A representative from a private investment group. Emma frowned. Why would they call you? Mason stared into the distance. The answer seemed almost impossible. Because they want to talk about buying something. The evening breeze moved gently across the property. The vehicles stood silent beneath the fading light. Across town, Savannah Reed reviewed financial reports she desperately wished looked different. Neither of them understood it fully yet. But the paths that began diverging on the morning of that cruel joke were now moving rapidly toward the same destination. And somewhere just beyond the horizon, a moment was approaching that would force an entire town to reconsider everything it thought it knew. The meeting took place on a quiet Thursday afternoon beneath a sky painted with soft autumn clouds. Mason Carter arrived wearing the same work boots he had worn for years. The same denim shirt. The same calm expression. Nothing about him suggested the journey he had taken over the previous weeks. Yet everything about him had changed. Across town, rumors had already begun spreading. People whispered about investment groups, about collectors, about private offers. Nobody knew the full story. Not yet. Inside a conference room overlooking downtown Willow Creek, representatives from the investment group waited beside stacks of documents. They had spent weeks reviewing the records connected to the 15 vehicles, the hidden network, the preservation history, the extraordinary collection that had somehow been mistaken for scrap. What began as a joke had become one of the most talked about automotive stories in the region. Mason listened quietly as the final details were presented. The offer was substantial. far beyond anything he had imagined when 15 broken vehicles first appeared on his property. Yet what mattered most to him was not the number. It was the opportunity, the chance to preserve the collection properly, the chance to secure Emma's future, the chance to continue building something meaningful. When the meeting ended, he signed the agreement with the same steady hand he used to rebuild engines. No celebration, no dramatic speech, just gratitude. A few days later, another story unfolded across Willow Creek. Reed Automotive officially announced plans to sell one of its struggling dealership locations. Financial pressures had finally forced difficult decisions. Employees worried about their jobs. Customers wondered what would happen next. Savannah Reed carried the weight of those decisions quietly, but it showed. The confidence remained. The strength remained. Yet exhaustion had found its way into her eyes. Then an unexpected call arrived. A private meeting request. Potential buyer. Serious interest. Savannah accepted immediately. She needed solutions. She did not expect the answer waiting on the other side of the table. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. Several managers attended. Attorneys prepared documents. Financial advisors reviewed details. Everyone expected a large corporate group or outside investor. When the conference room door opened, the entire room became silent. Mason Carter stepped inside. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Savannah simply stared. The same man she had publicly humiliated stood before her. The same man she believed would fail. The same man she turned into a joke. Yet there was no anger in his face. No satisfaction. No desire for revenge. Only quiet dignity. The room remained still. Mason offered a polite nod. Good morning. The silence lasted several seconds longer. Then Savannah slowly sat back in her chair. For the first time since anyone could remember, she seemed genuinely speechless. The discussions that followed were respectful and professional. Mason explained his intentions clearly. He wanted to purchase the dealership location. He wanted to preserve the jobs. He wanted to expand restoration operations and create opportunities for local workers. Nobody expected those answers, especially Savannah. When the meeting finally concluded, the documents were signed. The future of the dealership was secured. More importantly, the futures of dozens of employees were protected. As everyone prepared to leave, Savannah remained seated. The room gradually emptied until only she and Mason remained. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Dust floated quietly through the air. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Savannah looked at him. After everything I did, why would you help me? Mason thought carefully before answering. Because helping people is easier than becoming the person who hurt you. The words landed gently, yet they carried more weight than any argument ever could. Savannah lowered her eyes. For perhaps the first time in years, she understood the difference between success and character. Weeks later, Willow Creek held its annual community celebration downtown. Families filled the streets. Music drifted through the air. Food vendors lined the sidewalks. Near the center of town, several of the restored vehicles were displayed for the public. People gathered around them, reading their histories and admiring the craftsmanship that saved them. Emma stood proudly beside her father while visitors thanked him for preserving something the town nearly lost forever. The jokes had disappeared. The laughter had changed. It was warmer now, kinder, respectful. As the evening sun settled behind the horizon, golden light covered Main Street. Mason watched families walk past the vehicles. He watched former dealership employees greet one another. He watched Emma smiling among friends. In that moment, he realized the greatest reward had never been money. It was peace. The kind that arrives when integrity survives hardship. The kind that follows grace. The kind that cannot be purchased. Across the street, Savannah stood quietly observing the crowd. Their eyes met briefly. She smiled. Mason returned the gesture. Nothing more needed to be said. Sometimes the strongest victories happen without applause. Sometimes the most powerful justice arrives without revenge. And sometimes the people who are underestimated become the very people who remind everyone else what dignity looks like. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments a moment when kindness proved stronger than pride. And if you believe that character, second chances, and quiet strength still matter, we would be honored to have you join us again for another story.